Hello? Hello? Please, I know you can hear us. We are trapped here in the spaces between worlds. It is a wonderful yet terrifying place, and only our voices escape. You can help us. You can let us in before we go mad.
Smoker Beware by Curtiss Christensen. I stepped into the alley and lit up a cigarette. I looked to my left and right. No one stood next to me. Not anymore. Seemed like everybody'd kicked the habit except for me. I stood there puffing away with only the dumpster for company. "Hey!" shouted someone nearby. I jumped from the sound and spun. An ugly little head poked around the door. "You can't smoke there," he said. "I always smoke here," I replied. "Not anymore. 50 feet from the building. It's a health hazard." "To who? The pavement or the garbage?" I protested. "Don't matter who. Them's the rules. Now get!" "Can I just finish this one before you boot me?" "Nope. I can already smell it wafting into the building." "Well, close the door. You're the one letting it in." "You've probably already shaved a year off my life," he continued, ignoring me. "Secondary smoke is worse than being a smoker yourself, you know." I inhaled sharply until the cigarette burned nearly to the filter, took aim and flicked the smoldering projectile toward the end of his swaying tie. He ducked behind the door and yelped. "I oughta call the cops on you. This is assault," he yelled as he slammed the door. I chuckled a bit as I walked out of the alley onto the busy sidewalk. I doubted if the guy was actually going to get the police, but the last thing I needed was a hefty fine for ignoring the stupid rule. I marked my distance using my own feet as measurement. I nearly reached the street before I was a safe 50 feet away. I pulled out another cigarette. This prompted the erection of an imaginary force field. People striding down the walk gave me a wide berth and made damn well sure I knew why. The pedestrians eyed me with disdain, disgust, or even fury. One woman put on quite a show by blocking the eyes of her infant child in a stroller. She awkwardly hobbled sideways in an exaggerated arc, just to ensure that her baby was safely away from me and oblivious to my tobacco sin. The reactions of random strangers paled in comparison to the ads plastered on every billboard, bus stop, and banner. They showed rotten teeth, inflamed tumors on throats, blackened lungs, shriveled fetuses, diseased hearts, coughing children, amputees, tar, ash, decay. I even saw a bus plastered with blood and pus and smoke. The images sickened me. The bottom of each one proclaimed, "Proudly paid for by the Tobacco-Free Tax Initiative." My own damned cigarettes bankrolled these grotesque displays. Funny, though, the ads elicited the opposite effect as intended. I desired nicotine more now. I flicked my lighter and drew in breath. Through the flame, I thought I saw someone standing across the street from me. The waves of heat made it look like the lower portion of this person's face was a mass of contiguous flesh. I blinked and the figure vanished into the crowd. My wristwatch chimed. time to get back to work. I extinguished the butt under my shoe and went to the elevator. I walked past a group of women who very loudly gossiped about my habit. I waited for the lift with a group of my coworkers. They stood a distance away from me. When it arrived at our floor, I stepped in and positioned my arm to hold the door. No one else followed. Guys, you coming? I asked them.
No, we'll get the next one,
said one of them. But I'm the only one in here, I said.
I, forgot my wallet in my car, said another.
My God, I'm late for a meeting, shouted yet another. All of you can't have something. Why won't you get on? What am I, chopped liver? I joked, trying to cut through the tension.
I won't lie to you like the rest of these buffoons. You're not liver, but you reek a fair sight worse. I probably won't even be able to stomach entering this elevator even after you've vacated it. I'm taking the stairs,
replied a frumpy-looking woman crammed into an ill-fitting power suit. My arm sank away from the door. It slid shut, cutting me off from the expressions of revulsion. I expected at least a few glances of apology, or perhaps a hint of pity, but neither showed on their faces. Half-heartedly, I pushed the button for my floor. I sauntered toward my cubicle. The manager motioned for me when I was almost there. I redirected myself toward her office and entered. She sat at her desk with a grim but joyous look in her eyes. She pointed to the chair opposite her. I sat in it and waited. She let me stew, delighted by my increasing panic.
Mr. Gibson,
she said, finally breaking the silence.
Your work has been exemplary. You are in the running for our highest figures this week.
I straightened up in my chair and beamed at her.
However,
she continued,
we need to address the elephant in the room. It's the one with the fuming, rotting trunk.
My head fell to my chest.
Mr. Gibson, whilst your work results are commendable, your work ethic could use a bit of improvement. Do you really think that it is appropriate to smoke on company time?
Her voice rose an octave and about 3 decibels. Ma'am, I take the same amount of time for breaks as everyone else, I protested.
But whilst they are eating snacks and chatting, you are out there filling your lungs and the air with poison. Unacceptable!
Pardon me, but I don't think it's your place to dictate how I spend my union-negotiated break period.
Oh, but it is. It is now, Gibson. Your precious union caved. I guess they couldn't see the allure of smoking either. From now on, every cigarette you huff is $1 off your hourly. We'll be watching. We have been watching. I'd wager you'd be at about 8 an hour today at the rate you've been sucking them down. Keep your cancer off the clock!
Fine. I'll cut back. Please. I need the money. Just want a break, I promise.
Not good enough. You keep smoking and we'll keep cutting away. No more smoking!
She screamed. All right, I'll try. It's hard. This job ain't easy.
A job worth doing is a job worth doing hard.
I don't think that's the saying.
Get back to work, Gibson!
I rose from the chair and turned to leave. Before I could escape, she spoke again.
Oh, before I forget, your health insurance has been voided.
What? I stammered.
You are no longer covered under company health insurance. They can't afford to cover suicide.
I praised the clock as it struck 5. Took the stairs this time. Harder to avoid the outcast on steps than in enclosed space. As soon as I had entered my vehicle, I sparked a cigarette. It tasted sweeter than honey and more satisfying than sex. I drove home, eager to put this day behind me. My wife and daughter waited for me. My 4-year-old child jumped up and down on my feet until I picked her up. I caught a faint frown of disapproval flash across my wife's face.
"Daddy, Daddy!"
she squealed. "Did you miss me?" I asked.
"Yeah."
"I missed you too. Let's go see what Mommy cooked up for supper." Dinner already sat on the table. I leaned in to kiss my wife as I walked by on my way to the table, but she recoiled. Instead, her lips gently grazed my cheek for a fraction of an instant. I seated myself at the dinner table and dished up a banquet of baked ham, mashed potatoes, and green beans. She sat beside me and awaited my appraisal of her meal. "Thank you for making dinner," I said before taking a bite. "I had a hell of a day at work, and this makes it all better. I am so glad to have a loving wife to care for me. I don't know what I would do without you." She feigned a smile, but it looked more a distant grimace to me. I ignored it. Perhaps she had had a hell of a day as well. I shoved a spoonful of potato-laden ham into my mouth and rolled it over my tongue. To my shock, it tasted bland. I might as well have been shoveling dirt down my gullet.
"Well, what do you think?"
asked my wife. I struggled to force the dry, flavorless drivel down my throat. I looked at my daughter. She shoveled the food into her mouth, smearing potatoes across her cheeks. "It's good," I said. I desperately hugged the line between outright lying and patronization. She saw right through it.
"What do you really think? This was a new recipe and I seasoned the bejesus out of everything. I know you like a little kick." "So yummy,"
chimed our kid. "Honestly, it was a little lacking," I replied.
"Oh no, I knew this would happen. They say that smoking kills your taste buds. But oh dear, I can barely manage this. It's like eating incense. You can't taste anything at all, can you?"
she cried. No, I like it. It just caught me off guard is all. I'm not used to such exotic flavors," I said as I tried one of the green beans. It tasted blanche, and the stringy texture set my stomach to churning. I choked down the whole plate despite my gut's protestation. After dinner, I cleared our plates and washed them in the sink. I felt sick.
"Hey, babe,"
said my wife. "Hmm?" I responded with a bit of a cough.
"I'm late."
"Late for what? Bedtime? A gentleman caller?" I teased.
"No, my period. I'm late."
"You mean?"
"I think I'm pregnant."
Joy swelled in my gut and replaced the nausea. I grabbed her by the waist. When do you find out for sure?" I asked.
"My ultrasound is scheduled for Thursday."
"That's in 2 days. Don't let them slip on the gender. I want it to be a surprise."
"Of course. I wouldn't have it any other way."
I took my daughter to her room and tucked her in. I read her a book about a monkey named Sir Bananas that cheats a dragon out of its gold. She pointed and laughed at the pictures of Sir Banana's shenanigans. When I finished reading, I kissed my daughter on the forehead. She looked at me sternly.
Daddy,
"Hmm?"
are you going to die?
she asked. "What? No."
Mommy says you are. I don't want you to die.
She said that? Don't you worry. Daddy's going to be around for a long, long time. Don't listen to Mommy. She was just joking. Now, you get some sleep. I went to bed, ignoring what my daughter had told me. Were I a more confident man, I would have confronted my wife right there on the spot. But I felt lucky just to be with a woman of her caliber. I dared not push that luck. My dreams took a dark turn. I only remembered a little. Tubing, beeping, and white light. The phone rang, waking me. I toyed with letting it ring, but answered anyway. "William Gibson?" asked the voice on the other end. "Yes." "It's your mother. She's not well. Had a massive stroke. There were several other complications. You need to come see her as soon as possible." I hung up the phone. I didn't even wake my wife. I just left and drove to the emergency room. I killed 3 cigarettes on the way. They admitted me to her room. The doctors told me that along with the stroke, tumors riddled her entire body. Emergency services had found her not breathing and resuscitated her. They discovered the cancer throughout her and cut out what they could, but there was too much. She was a wreck. It looked as though she had aged 10 years. Hoses fed into her nose and connected to an oxygen tank. Sparse strands of gray hair adorned her wrinkled head. Cataracts covered her eyes. She lay in the hospital bed, her body feeble. The left half of her face drooped. I saw pain in her eyes. "Mom?" I asked with tears forming. She placed an electrolarynx to her chin with her good arm and spoke with robotic sound.
"Billy, is that you?"
"Yes, Mom, I'm here."
"Billy, I can't see you. Why does it hurt so much?"
"You had a stroke, Mom, and there's cancer."
"A stroke? I can't move. What's going on? There is something heavy on me. Can you get it off?"
"You'll be all right. Just hang in there."
"Billy, listen to me. Why don't they tell you it's addictive?"
"What?"
"You don't smoke them. They..."
The beeping of the heart rate monitor turned to a sustained tone. Nurses and doctors rushed in, knocking me aside. I gaped dumbfounded from the hospital floor as the whole ordeal unfolded. They tried to jolt her heart 3 times before one of the doctors pronounced the time of death. We held her funeral a week later. The loss of my mother overshadowed the news that my wife was pregnant with twins. The funeral was closed casket. No one wanted to see what she had become. I dropped tulips into her grave as the preacher spoke comforting words of a divine foot race that had been cut too short. Attendees dropped handfuls of dirt over the coffin. Tears blurred my vision, but I swore that I saw someone in the crowd who looked like a burn victim. His nose appeared melted away and left only a skeletal remnant. My mother's death was attributed to tobacco use. My wife took it to heart. She banished me to smoking outside. I thought about quitting, but the cigarettes always called me back. I struggled at work. The manager had not been joking. Someone watched me on my breaks, and they saw every time I caved. Without fail, the manager docked my pay true to her word. I grew irritable and bitter, traits that worked against my sales record. I dropped from a top salesman to barely meeting quota. The excitement of 2 children growing in my wife's womb kept me going, but soon even that was not enough. I updated my resume and started applying to other businesses. That one damn question marred every application. It took many forms, but the gist remained the same. Do you smoke? I checked the box that read yes, and here I was. None of them responded. No one even took the time to grant me an interview. I felt like a pariah. One night as I walked past my daughter's room to the bathroom, I heard her cough. It was just a small sound, but I opened the door to check regardless. The image of my daughter holding a glowing cigarette to her mouth burned itself into my retinas. "What are you doing?" I growled quietly. I took the cigarette from her hand and tossed it out the open window.
"I'm just like Daddy,"
she replied proudly. "That is not okay," I said. "Those are for adults. Don't you ever smoke again."
"But Daddy, when you smoke, I smoke."
"Where did you even get that?" I asked. My cigarette sat safely in my pocket.
"The man with no mouth gave it to me."
My brain turned a full cartwheel. That made no sense. Was she lying? "Don't play games with me. Where did you get it?"
"Really, he opened the window. He even lit it so I could be just like you."
I slammed the window and locked it. I caught someone moving below in the corner of my eye. Down in the light of the street lamp stood a figure. His face was shrouded by darkness, but I knew that below his eyes he possessed neither a nose or mouth. I went out back to have a quick cig before bed. I scarcely believed what I had just witnessed. My 4-year-old smoking. What in the world was going on? Nothing felt right anymore. The sound of the door opening startled me.
"Will,"
said my wife,
"put that cursed thing out and come in here."
"Can I finish?" I asked a bit too harshly. She pressed her bloated belly through the door and smacked the cigarette out of my hand.
"William, it's time,"
she stated. I broke into a fit of hacking. "What? But, it's a month early. You can't have the babies now," I said between coughs.
"Early or not, my water broke while you were out here tarring up your lungs. Take me to the hospital. Now."
The receptionist at the hospital escorted us to our room. I paced around like a caged animal. More than anything, I wanted a smoke. The doctor came in after what felt like hours to give my wife an epidural. He took one whiff of me and scowled.
"Mr. Gibson, take a shower and get rid of those clothes. You smell like an ashtray, and I won't have that in my delivery room."
I matched his scowl with a frown of my own, but left the shower anyway. When I had finished, they were ready. I followed behind as the nurses wheeled my wife's bed through the corridor. I noticed a man in one of the other rooms. He fawned over his newborn child. What struck me, however, was his face. Everything on top seemed normal. His hair was blonde, eyes blue, and his cheeks ruddy. But below that there was nothing. His mouth and nose were absent. The delivery proved an exercise in patience. I performed my supporting role as husband. I held my wife's hand as she squeezed like a tightening vice. I uttered words of support. I waited. 5 hours in, and the delivery room erupted into activity. Doctors and nurses shouted and gathered equipment. I tried to ask them what was happening, but they ignored me.
Is something wrong?
Asked my drug-addled wife. I don't know, dear. Just let the professionals handle this, I replied. I maintained a thin veneer of tranquility. Meanwhile, anxiety bounced around in my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a cigarette. I slipped away in the confusion and made my exit. Outside, I scarcely bothered to glance at a frail figure that sat in a wheelchair. I lit up my smoke and felt instant relief. Treat us like second-class citizens, don't they? Asked a raspy voice beside me. Huh? I replied. I turned to the man in the wheelchair. The hunched figure wheeled himself into the light. An IV bag trailed behind him. The wrinkly old man's back curved downward so his gangly neck shot out straight forward. Purplish bags drooped beneath his sunken yellow eyes. Skin hung loosely from a malnourished frame. Us smokers, he said. They treat us like dirt. He held a lit cigarette between two spindly fingers. Damn straight, I said. All we want is a little pleasure to get us through the day. Why doesn't anybody understand? Hell if I know. I've been ridiculed, my pay has been cut, and even my own wife won't let me smoke in the comfort of my home. They act like we're less than human. I started smoking about 30 years ago, and I wouldn't give it up for the world. I took a long drag before saying, You've got that right. I started almost 10 ago, and it was the best decision of my life. Screw all these naysayers and imbeciles. I'm sick of being shamed for what I love. I'm sick of all the deranged advertisements and all the holier-than-thou preaching about health. They can suck it. Yep, he said. I had my first cigarette when I was 13. Everyone smoked back then and no one thought twice. I sucked in another breath of nicotine and exhaled before the math clicked in my brain. 13 and 30 equaled 43, give or take a few years. I sputtered from the realization. I clasped my hand to my face and coughed. A slurry of blood and mucus filled my palm. The 43-year-old man put the cigarette to his lips and pulled in the fumes. He leaned back, uncurling his spine. I saw a hole in his neck. He exhaled. Smoke poured from the stoma and drifted up through the light like a coiling serpent. I dropped my cigarette and bolted. Back in the delivery room, I sat in my appointed chair. The head doctor ran up to me and shouted in my face.
Where were you? No matter. This delivery has gone awry. We need to perform an emergency C-section.
What? Why? I asked.
Something is wrong. It will be fine. We just need to get those twins out as soon as possible.
What are you waiting for? Save my children.
It's not that simple, Mr. Gibson. Your wife has severe medical complications. We had to determine if she is capable of withstanding surgery.
And?
The risk is great, but I think we can pull it off.
Then do it, I screamed.
We are. Calm down. We'll do everything we can.
Nurses brought in a tray of scalpels suture needles, and a machine that suctioned blood and fluid. I nearly passed out when they started cutting. The incision ran along the bottom of my wife's swollen gut. The surgeon broke through the uterine wall and slid a large plastic tube into the wound. They ripped the first twin free. I expected it to start shrieking. The doctor slapped its behind. Still, it stayed silent. I got a good look as they lowered her into the incubation chamber. Her body was a jumbled, mangled mess. Her legs intertwined with each other and fused together. Her arms hung still, lopsided and asymmetrical. Several of her fingers jutted out at odd angles, and the others were stubs, or non-existent. A gap ran below her nose and beyond the edge of her left nostril. Her sallow skin stretched and rippled unnaturally. I knew that despite the actions of the doctors, she was dead. Then they ripped her brother from my wife. His screams echoed through the room. I could already tell that he possessed similar defects to his deceased sister. One of his eyes drooped and wept fluid. His head was misshapen. His disproportionate legs kicked sporadically like electrified frog legs. He lacked a left arm, and instead possessed just a flap of writhing skin, muscle, and tendon. A tiny heart beat through a shrunken chest. They placed him into another incubator and pushed him out of the room. I succumbed to my spinning head and fell to the floor. I woke in the same room the receptionist had taken us earlier. The skin on my cheek and left forearm was raw. Someone had dragged me here. I felt extensive bruises and abrasions all over my body. It might have been from the fall, but it seemed like more. It seemed like I had been beaten to a bloody pulp. I crawled up to my wife's bed and grabbed at her. I controlled the misery for a moment before sobbing.
"What's the matter with you?"
she asked. "Our baby, our daughter, she didn't make it," I said. The epiphany hit her slowly. My wife laid there and tears welled up in her eyes.
She's dead?
"Yes."
And the other?
she asked with desperation. "I don't know." As if on cue, the doctor entered the room.
"Your son is dead,"
he said.
How?
asked my wife.
"Fatal birth defects. It isn't your fault, Mrs. Gibson."
I don't understand. Shouldn't the defects have shown up on ultrasound?
"Normally, yes. But like I said, it isn't your fault. It's that bastard's,"
he said, pointing to me. "Me?" I replied. "What did I do?"
"The twins' cause of death has been linked to nicotine contaminants. Your fucking tobacco-soaked clothes killed your children,"
he shrieked. My wife didn't even wait to recover from surgery. She took our daughter and left. That was the end of our marriage. I received divorce papers in the mail a few days later. I refused to sign them until my lawyer convinced me that if I didn't, she would get everything I owned. As it was, she ended up with almost everything. After the divorce, she sued me for health damages to herself and our daughter. She won the suit in custody. My fine numbered in the millions. I explained to the judge that I didn't make half that in a year. He decided since I was unable to pay in full, A monthly check would be adequate. My sentence demanded that 3/4 of my pay go to my former wife for damages and child support. I reverted to the bachelor life. My wife got the house and had kicked me out. With all of my money drained, I hunted for a cheap living arrangement. Even with my impeccable credit, I struggled to find anything. I lied on my rental applications, but still they seemed to know that I smoked. Eventually, I found a place in the bad part of town. It cost twice as much as a cleaner, larger apartment, but they allowed smoking. I gathered my sparse belongings and moved into my dingy studio apartment. Cockroaches infested the building, the plumbing tasted of iron and lead, and the ceiling dripped water when it rained. My room smelled of mold and asbestos. I ate whatever I found to be cheap. I subsisted on instant ramen, bologna, and saltine crackers. Still, I barely found a way to make ends meet. The sound of gunfire occurred nightly. My smoker's cough worsened. Occasionally, I spit up bits of black flecked with blood. Despite hardship, I managed to save up enough to buy a medicine cabinet for the bathroom. As I installed it and removed the paper cover from its mirror, I saw myself. I gazed at a stranger. Flakes peeled away from my sagging, leathery skin. I pulled back my lips. My teeth were yellow and my gums had receded. I poked at a tooth and it sprung free with a squelch. White sores covered my tongue. Swollen lymph nodes stood out on my neck. It was too much. The shock knocked me over. I broke out into a cold sweat. Pain erupted in my left arm and shoulder. A pressure formed in my chest. I laid on the bathroom floor, unable to move. I heard a scraping sound from my front door. The knob rattled, and the door creaked open. "Help," I whispered. A man with a ski mask on his face stopped over me.
"Holy shit,"
he said.
"Are you all right?"
"No," I replied. "I need help."
"Jeez, can you hold on for like 10 minutes?
"Are you serious?" I asked, incredulous.
"Well, yeah. It took a lot of effort to break in here. I'd at least like to recoup the losses for time spent."
"Fine. Take whatever you want. Just call an ambulance when you're done."
"Promise you won't press charges if I get caught?"
"For God's sake, yes. Just get me some help." The pressure in my chest increased tenfold. I watched as the burglar absconded with the entirety of my meager possessions. 30 minutes passed before he called EMS, and 10 more elapsed before they arrived. The paramedics loaded me up in an ambulance. They jammed an IV into my arm and drove me to the hospital. Everything moved in agonizing slow motion. I woke up after my heart valve surgery. The doctor entered the hospital room.
"Mr. Gibson, can I call you William?"
he asked. "I don't really care. Would you mind if I go outside for a smoke?"
"I think that would be unwise given the circumstances. Your heart attack was just the tip of the iceberg, I'm afraid."
"I feel fine. I just need a smoke."
"You are not fine, William. You have emphysema, your organs are failing, the lining of your stomach has become ulcerated, your kidneys are overloaded with toxins, and your arteries are filled with fatty deposits. Just look at the one we pulled out of your chest."
The doctor placed a fleshy pink tube on the end table next to me. He squeezed it like a tube of toothpaste. Congealed yellow sludge flowed from the end. The goop looked like putrid cottage cheese. "Get that shit away from me!" I yelled.
That shit is clogging up your blood vessels. You'll be dead within a week.
How is this possible? I never had any issue before.
You're a smoker. This is the inevitable result. Surely you knew.
I never imagined.
You don't have to imagine. It's happening. You're dying.
But I don't want to die.
Well, then you shouldn't have started smoking. However, you may just have a chance. It's slim, but an opportunity nonetheless. If you choose this treatment, you just might survive. Even if you die, your sacrifice will provide us with invaluable data.
What is it? I'll do anything. Please, just let me live.
The treatment is experimental radical gene therapy. Are you sure you want it?
Yes. Do it. The doctor slid his clipboard across the end table. My displaced artery rolled under it, and the cottage cheese gunk smeared over the faux wooden surface.
Sign this,
he said. I scrawled my name on the line. Time passed in irrelevance during my induced coma. Days, months, years, I had no clue. I regained consciousness. Thick smog drifted around me. I thought it a hallucination, or some symptom of the fog covering my mind. But as I regained faculty of thought, I realized this haze was real. A plexiglass enclosure surrounded me. It trapped the sickly sweet vapor within it. My stomach panged with nausea. I felt weak, but alive. I heard hissing. A man entered my cage through an airlock. He was garbed in a suit of white plastic. He wore a respirator over his face.
Well,
he said,
the good news is that you're still living. The bad news is that you're no longer human.
The hell does that mean? I asked. He didn't reply. Instead, he held up a mirror. I stared in disbelief at my reflection. Folds of pale blue skin wrinkled across my nude body. Swollen patches of red and yellow marred tumorous growths that interrupted the blue. Boils on the tumors oozed a dark gray fluid. Scoliosis twisted my spine. Nothing hung between my legs save a flap of flesh. Weeping sores bled on my hairless scalp. Holes on the side of my head replaced my ears. A translucent membrane covered my eyes. My lengthy nose hooked and extended several inches beyond my face. My lips puckered to a tiny sphincter that looked just the right size for a cigarette. The sides of my neck striated with gill flaps that pumped out smoke in a flutter of bright red frills. I looked in the mirror and laughed.
This is no laughing matter,
said the doctor. Oh, but it is. You really had me going, I replied.
Are you insane? You are a mutant. You rely upon tobacco to survive. You will never live a normal life again. Not to mention the enormous debt. This therapy wasn't cheap.
It isn't real.
This is as real as it gets. Give up your cigarettes so that others can live. That's all you have to do.
Oh my God. You really had me going. Dead mom, smoking daughter, defect twins. Holy shit.
William, what is the matter with you? You're a horrible monster now, and all because of cigarettes. Doesn't that make you feel regret?
Regret? Nah, all I have is a headache.
Get a hold of yourself. Focus. You are a mutant, a freak. You became this creature because of your addiction to tobacco. Work with me. Let go.
This is all just a dream, I said as I yanked the mask off the doctor. The respirator straps snapped, revealing the doctor's face. Scar tissue sealed his mouth and his sunken nose exposed cartilage and bone. I laughed again. I regained true consciousness in an uncomfortable chair. I opened my eyes to blonde hair, irises of blue, ruddy cheeks, and a surgical mask. I recognized him from my dream as the man with no mouth or nose. I planted my forehead in his chin. He fell to the ground. A wire dangled from my head. I yanked at it and a length of thick needle emerged from my skull. Agonizing pain racked my brain, but relief followed the agony.
We were just trying to free you from the grip of addiction,
blubbered the man. You shouldn't have messed with my head, I said. I rammed the needle into his throat and pulled it sharply up to his chin. Blood bubbled from the gaping gash on his neck. His hands clasped to his throat, desperately trying to quell the flood of red, but fluid spurted out regardless. He thrashed on the floor before his body stilled. His voice gurgled in a last attempt to speak, but the life drained from his eyes. I surveyed the room and recognized it. I was in a re-education facility. I tried the door, but it was locked by keypad. Bulletproof glass barred my exit to the inner garden as well. I rifled through the doctor's pockets and found nothing but a lighter and a pack of cigarettes. Hypocrite, I thought as I flicked the lighter. The smokes weren't my brand, but they tasted sweeter than honey and more satisfying than sex.